And we are live. Okay. So we're here once again every week, Sunday, 11:30 a.m. California time. And as we wait for people to get in here, let's talk about some recent things, recent questions. Things are kind of tough here right now, but I'm trying to work with it. Comments. Why did I get no notifications about that? One person asked, how long do I estimate that the person or will take a person to achieve the American English mouth posture? We can start there. I don't have an answer for that yet because the course is not completed and nobody has completed it. But with the new pieces that I have discovered, working with a newer student who has barely started phase 0, I just went through and I tried to go through the pieces to see how it would affect his sound and his ability to do a perfect schwa sound, true schwa. And amazingly, he got it almost perfectly. So that tells me that it's very likely that the total course time, whatever the total course time would have been, it's probably going to be at least cut in half. I'm estimating once I finish the course and I work in these new pieces, maybe I might take the average person about 3 months to develop the proper posture, which I know seems really fast to a lot of people, but if you do the right things happen. So I'm super excited to see how this turns out. Recently posted a video analyzing your guys' recordings. I had you send in submissions. If you want to do that, you can send them to my email for the latest sentence, which I can go here. And let's get a link for this. So if you use the sentence that is at the end of this lesson, you will be able to record your own version of that sentence. Again, the one at the end of the lesson is going to be the new sentence, not the one that's being analyzed in that video. And you have a chance to get feedback. Right now, I don't have a whole lot of submissions, so it's very likely that you'll get your feedback. But if I get a lot of submissions, I'm just going to pick the ones that I think would be best to go over for everybody. Let's see here. Other questions. So I'm super happy to see this. Somebody agrees with me about vowel length with, as I said before, it's more about the stress. And the thing that happens if you go from like I to T or I to D, you have to stop the voice before you reach that T or D position, which makes the vowel seem shorter. There's a cat. But it's actually a byproduct of the consonant that you're going into. And this person commented basically saying exactly the same thing. So it's always nice to see confirmation from other people's perspectives, because sometimes I'm a lonely voice, just feeling like I'm rebelling against what everybody else is saying. And so anytime somebody agrees with me or confirms it, that makes me feel a little bit more, I don't want to say certain, because I'm already pretty certain. I could always be wrong, but it's just good to know that there are other people that agree with that perspective. Let's see what else. Not a whole lot of questions this week, doesn't look like. Okay. Got anybody in here yet? Come on, guys. We need questions. Questions. There's nobody here. It's so dead. That's okay. Also, with how things are looking, I mean, I plan to keep my regular schedule, continue to try to post, you know, what I can, keep working on videos, keep having these live streams. But depending on how things go with the economy, there's a chance that the live streams might not be able to continue. For now, they should be fine, but we'll see what happens. Frazina is here. Thank you for letting me know you're here. Very good. Welcome, welcome. Let me know if you have any questions. Just kind of trying to talk about some stuff while we wait for people to get in here. Not a whole lot of questions. Okay, what else can I talk about? I'm thinking, okay, so we have some things here. Chiggy is here. Welcome, Chiggy. Oh, Chiggy became a member. See, I don't get notifications when you guys become members for some stupid reason. Let me see memberships. Yes, Chiggy has joined. Very much appreciated. Thank you very much. That's one step closer to actually being able to do this full time. But I'm still very far from that. Frazina, how would you pronounce "they've finally come true"? Would you connect the V with the F? They finally come true. Okay, so there's an interesting thing about the voiceless pairs like V and F. If you're fully enunciating, or you're just on, you can just enunciate on that part to make it clear. That's fine too. Then yeah, you would say like a V and an F, but you wouldn't leave the position because they're in the same position, right? So they've finally. You just let the voice drop while holding the position. It becomes an F. However, if we're speaking more quickly or just normally, they finally. We probably say they finally. There might be a little bit of V, kind of like similar to how we do partial end of word devoicing. We might start just a tiny bit in the V and then just let the F take over. Or you can just go straight into the F. So it actually sounds like they finally with no have contracted. And if the context is clear, that's fine because then it sounds like there's no have there, right? But if the context isn't clear, this is a good case, a good example of where you might want to actually enunciate that V to make it clear. But especially with the use of come instead of they finally came, it's probably going to be understood. Usually we can rely on certain grammatical structures like that to make it clear. So it's usually not a problem. And I forgot to put that up. I forgot I could do that. So that was the question. Hopefully that makes sense. Chiggy, remember that it's a range, right? So there's not one answer. There's what's likely to happen. But again, in this case, because of the like whether the context is clear or not, that can also affect how likely you might enunciate or might not. So it's a little bit of a extra issue in there. Chiggy, I have a question about your book, How to Learn a Language. In the vocabulary chapter, are there any tips on how to memorize or learn phrases, not words, in joyful ways? So that's a good question. I wrote that book a few years ago. I don't remember everything that's in the book. How I wrote the book is I took a gigantic mind dump and like literally there were like weeks where I was like thinking of more things because it doesn't just all come to you at once, right? I'm trying to like think of everything I know about learning a language, some things that I'm borrowing from polyglots, and I try to reference. So I got it from this person, a lot of it through my own experience and my own ideas. And so literally it was just this constant process of like writing down notes, integrating the notes into the book and separating out the different topics and stuff. So I don't remember every last little thing that was in there. It's up here somewhere. But phrases specifically, I probably mentioned something about phrases. I don't know. If there is, I mean, it's going to be in the book. It should have like some sort of heading. If you don't see any heading for phrases, then I don't know. It might just be sort of mixed in with some of the descriptions and explanations of other things. But phrases, you generally want to target phrases rather than words anyway. And there are places where I may not specifically use the word phrase, but for example, like I know I probably mentioned the Anki technique where whether you use Anki or not, you have like an example sentence with the word blanked out and then like a picture. So if it's like beach, right? I want to go to the blank and then you have a picture of a beach. In a sentence like that, it could be anywhere, right? So if you have the picture, okay, it's the beach. And then you're using that image along with the context of the sentence to not only get the word, but also have that word related to other words that are very naturally related, right? So even if I didn't use the word phrase in my explanation of that, that's kind of implied. So there's stuff like that in the vocabulary section. There's probably also stuff like that in the grammar section. Maybe also in the speaking section. But yeah, I don't think it's optimized for that specific topic. Now, your next question, should I get the Kindle version of your book or a paperback in your recommendations? If you want to be able to search things, the Kindle is really good. It doesn't matter which one you get. The paperback is just like if you want a physical copy. Some people like physical copies. You can hold it, you can flip through it. But the Kindle, I think, is better, or any sort of ebook is better for two reasons, I think. One, because as I said, it's searchable, so you can more easily find things. Number two, looks like there was a little delay there. Daniel's here. Welcome, Daniel. Number two, you're not using trees, right? So it's a little side thing. In fact, when I was first writing my first book, The Logic of Prepositions, I was really, really, really torn because I was thinking I was just going to release it as an ebook and not even have a physical version because I didn't want people ordering the physical version and using more paper. But at the end of the day, I figured I'll just leave that up to the individual. They can make that decision themselves. So it is what it is. But I would recommend the Kindle for those two reasons. So anyway, Daniel with a correction. Hello. Welcome, Daniel. Daniel Rodrigo. Let me know if you have any questions. I don't remember everybody's name. If this is your first time here, welcome. Thank you for stopping by. If it's not, I apologize for not remembering you. Usually the people who interact more, I'll remember better. I remember Fruzina only because we were talking about like the ZS sound in, I think, Hungarian, which was Fruzina's native language. So that stood out in my brain. But okay, so we got some people here. We got to get more questions, guys. More questions. Going back to Chiggy, with learning other things than pronunciation. I've done a couple polls asking you guys, like, are you like of the following, what would you be most interested in? There's like pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary. And of course, because I've posted mostly about pronunciation so far on the channel, and that's probably what most of my audience is, I usually get a bunch of votes for pronunciation more than anything else. And as I've said before, this is not a pronunciation channel. It seems like it, but it's not. I just started there because that's my first pillar. That's the core of everything. It's the most important thing. One thing I'm thinking, especially since aside from the mouth posture course, like the main pronunciation course that I was originally building is essentially done. I have some extra practice and minimal pair lessons I still have to make here and there, but like that course is very solid. So I'm doing the mouth posture stuff on the side, which is going to sort of revolutionize everything, I think. But that aside, because I'm still developing that, I'm thinking about. I have the lessons planned coming up. The present perfect continuous lesson for contractions, the master speaking lesson that I'm still testing on myself, and so that's all coming. But I'm thinking about pivoting. I'm still going to do the analysis. I'm still going to have pronunciation content, but I'm thinking of pivoting a bit more towards like grammar and stuff. Grammar, speaking, listening skills, other things than just pronunciation, because number one, that's going to help widen the audience. More people are going to find the channel. And number two, because as I said, this isn't a pronunciation channel. So at some point I have to branch out. I really wanted the Logic of Preposition series to be the first big like non-pronunciation thing that I built. But those lessons take me so long to make that, as I said before, in a community post, I need to wait until I get an editor, because otherwise you guys are going to have to wait like 2 weeks for me to edit one Logic of Preposition video. And that's all you get every 2 weeks, like maybe even 3 weeks. That's how long it takes me. And that doesn't seem fair to everybody else, especially the people who are not here for that. So if I have an editor, I can still record regular stuff that I plan to make, send it to the editor. They can edit that while I edit the preposition video. So unfortunately, that's just kind of where it is. And I'm going to have to kind of come back to that later. Okay, Daniel, I want to ask you some questions. I hope they won't bother you. Well, probably not. Can I change I need to rest to I need to rest and make the D as a flap? Good question. Very, very good question. Yes. Now, if you say I need a rest, that sounds exactly like I need a rest, which when you say I need a rest or I need to rest, grammatically they're not the same, but in context, they basically mean the same thing. Like there's not much difference, so it doesn't really matter. But that T and to is very weak, right? We know that it can be affected by the sound before it. It can maybe turn into a flap D if this situation is right. It could maybe disappear like in wanna. In this case, because we have the D in need, it can go ahead and just disappear. We have the left. You can even keep the as ooh, I need to rest, need to rest. It can happen, but not likely, but it can happen. It's possible. So one way to pronounce need to rest is nida, just like need a. It's just the pronunciation can be the same for both of those. And as I said, in context, it doesn't matter too much. So yeah, good. Fuzina, what is difference of the meaning? Okay, so what is, we'll probably say what is the difference? So the difference in meaning. Okay, the difference in meaning of these sentences. That's a little bit of a tricky one there, but you got that mostly right. What have you done in the library? What were you doing in the library? What did you do in the library? Well, they are all quite discreetly different. What did you do in the library? You're asking, so somebody went to the library, they did something. That's one event in the past, and you want to know what it was that they did. What is the action that happened? So I read a book. Okay. What were you doing in the library? That you want to know, it sounds more like you're asking about what is the reason you were there? Okay, now it could be a strict question about like what action was happening. So it's sort of the continuous version of the did you? And that can get a little similar and confusing, but it's probably more likely that we're not going to be it's sort of an expanded meaning of that basic meaning of like what was happening, what was going on, what was in process, but with the specific intention of finding out the purpose, right? Like why were you in the library, what were you doing there? And then what have you done in the library? So this is present perfect. This, I mean, there's many contexts where this could happen, but off the top of my head, this sounds maybe a bit more like probably like you go to the library regularly, but The thing that comes to my mind is like for example, cleaning, right? So it's like done would refer to like what has been cleaned. So like maybe one day you clean, these bookshelves. The other day you vacuum the floor. The other day, or it could even be like not even day by day. It could just be like in one day. But it sounds sort of like there's the start of being in the library, and then there's the things that you have done up to the present moment. Um, uh, this context is a little bit weird with the present perfect. That's why probably like I'm thinking of cleaning, because like, I mean, you could say like, well, I've read many books since I got here, but usually you don't sit in the library and read a bunch of books. You might read one book or go, look through several books if you're doing research or something. So it depends. The thing about grammar, everybody gets caught in like grammar rules and descriptions and like, oh, this is what this is used for. And number one, you want to feel it. You don't want to memorize the rules, because even if you memorize all the rules, it's not really going to help you that much. But grammar is a description first. But the real purpose of the grammar, like not as a set of rules, but just like why the language is constructed the way it is. And it doesn't matter what the ultimate reason of like how it changed from the past. Like we don't necessarily care about that too much, but you want to focus on what is the purpose of this grammatical structure in this context, right? So you'll learn, grammar books will teach you like the general purposes, and like the present perfect is used for this. It's like, okay, that's great. But then you have actual real life context and you're like, what's the difference between this and this? Sometimes they're the same. There might not be much difference. Even though the grammar is different, but the context doesn't really matter that much, and we get basically the same meaning. Or you would use one depending on if you want to express this specific thing, or use the other structure if you want to express that specific thing. So as you're learning grammar, I think it's very useful to not just try to like learn the rules and memorize things, actually think critically and be like, okay, so it says this is for this. So if I'm in this situation and I want to express this thing, then I would probably use this structure, or would I use this other structure? And if you approach it that way, you're actually probably going to learn it much more deeply and better, instead of just trying to memorize the rules. So think about why the grammar is used, not just what the meaning is. Do we pronounce the D twice in I'd died? Like I just did, I enunciated it. So yes, if you enunciate, I'd died. Okay. If you don't enunciate it, which remember, enunciation is a tool. It's not the normal thing that we do. If you have two D's between two words like this, you're going to stop the first one and push out the second one. I died. I died. So it's sort of like a held D. It's like a long D, but because it's a stop sound, we can't hold it like an L or an S, right? And that's the way that we, instead of I died, and that sort of takes longer, it's a little harder to push out two D's in a row. So we just like hold the first one, push out the second one. And because it sounds a little bit longer, instead of I died, that just sounds like I died. But if you say I died, sounds a little longer, sounds like there's an apostrophe D there. If you're speaking really quickly, you can drop that first D anyway and just say I died. But it might not be clear. And this is a case where you might want to, even if you're speaking quickly, you might want to sort of slow down, emphasize a little bit, and then speed back up. Make sure that you do keep that little bit of an extra length there. It's a dynamic range, as I told you guys. Chicky, how long should I practice mouth posture? Well, I try to give you guys guideline instructions in the lessons. The general framework for your practice has not changed. That remains the same so far, which is an hour a day. Okay, if you could do 2 hours a day, you'll probably improve faster. I have some students that do 2 hours a day and they improve faster. If you try to do like 4, 5, 6 hours a day, there's a point where you get diminishing returns. It's not going to be useful anymore. But at least 1 hour a day. I know we're busy. You could do a half hour in the morning, half hour in the evening, or whatever. That's fine. But you also want to make sure that you do not skip the warm-up. Okay, I cannot emphasize that enough, because I've had several students that I thought they were doing the warm-up, but they weren't. And it negatively impacted their progress. They actually slid backward in their progress because they weren't doing the warm-up. They just kept trying to focus on the new stuff. The warm-up, it's called a warm-up. It's a little deceiving. The purpose of the warm-up is to warm you up, right? To get you going and get you in position. But it's also designed to help you make little improvements to the things that you don't have perfect, because you only have to get about 80% perfect to pass and start looking at something new. And it's designed that way for a reason, because trying to 100% things is not the most efficient use of your time. Now, with these new pieces that I've discovered, I might be changing that, because it seems like it actually might be a lot easier to 100% things. But that remains to be seen. So you get 80% perfect, say on the ah sound, right? It's not perfect, but it's 80%. It's really good. It sounds like an ah. It's just there's a little something missing. Okay. So then in your warm up, right, that moves into your warm up, and you're going to spend, maybe 1 or 2 minutes on the ah sound, trying to actually make a little bit of improvement in that time. And then the main focus is, whatever the new material is. So you're always straight from phase zero, right? Phase zero is new stuff. So you have new stuff you're working on. And then as you start passing things in phase zero, they move into a warm up, which should be no more than 10 to 15 minutes at the start of your hour. And that includes the total hour time. So your actual practice will only be like 45 to 50 minutes, approximately. I try to keep it within that range, more or less. And then as more new things are learned and reach a passing score, they move into the warm-up as more new things are added. Now, eventually your warm-up would get so big. So once you master or get like, say, 98, 99% on these warm-up pieces, they fall out of the warm-up. And you can go back to them every once in a while and play with them if you want. But at that point, you have a really good solid grasp over them that you can kind of drop them. And so that way your warm-up stays a decent size. You're always working on new material that you're spending most of your time on, and everything just filters through like that throughout the whole course. That's how it's designed. So if you don't follow that, you're not doing it as intended, and you're probably not going to get the right results. As for the total time of how long the course is going to take, I don't know. It's not finished yet. Do you pronounce efficiently like efficiently? Yes, you can drop the T. There's no problem. It's very common. I think off the top of my head, anytime you have NTLY, you can drop the T. So efficiently, I don't know. I can't think of other other words. I'm horrible thinking of things off the top of my head, but yes, the answer there is yes. You can do that. Especially if you're speaking quickly. If you're enunciating more and you say, I want to do it efficiently, probably push out the T. You say, I want to do it efficiently. Sounds a little bit weird if you're speaking that clearly. Again, it's a range. But if you're speaking normally and you're not trying to enunciate, then there's no problem with it. Thanks for pronouncing my name correctly. Oh, okay, good. You're the only one who could do that. Fruzina, is that right? Fruzina? I hope that's right. I think that's how I said it. I'm just I'm trying to say it. You're welcome. Hopefully I said it right again. I see the Z first, so I'm just trying to go off of the Z. I might be trying to blend the S and the Z a little bit. Fruzina, instead of Z. I don't know. But okay, back to your book. Did you talk about becoming fluent? Sorry if it's a relevant question. I talked a little bit about my experience. So right now my Spanish is really rusty. Really rusty because I don't use it. But I definitely reached conversational fluency for sure. And I've helped people get past conversational fluency as well. So I referenced my own experience where necessary. I think I opened the book with my first Spanish conversation with an actual native speaker, how I was super terrified. But that's not necessarily the most relevant thing. You're hands down the best pronunciation teacher on YouTube. Well, thank you. Awesome. Hopefully that will expand to hands down the best English teacher on YouTube, because I'm going to be talking about more than pronunciation. A Spanish speakers, welcome Joe. Spanish speakers find it very difficult to say several consonants in a row, like the combinations earls. Gotta hate the IPA. Flap D. There's no such thing as a flap T. I know it's splitting hairs, but it affects your perception. There's no such thing as a flap T, because if it's spelled with a T but it flaps, it's voiced. The only flap that exists is a D. It's always a D sound. Um, I don't care how it's spelled. One of the biggest I'm not gonna go on a little rant here. You triggered me. Sorry. But one of the biggest problems with the way that pronunciation or just English in general is taught is that it focuses, whether you use the IPA or not, it focuses or it confuses too much of the sound with the spelling. And you can't do that in any language, but especially in English. If the script is phonetic, like in Spanish, you can get away with it. It's still going to cause some problems with native language interference, and it's not recommended. But in a language like English, you cannot do that. It's best case scenario. It's going to cause some perceptual issues and slow you down. Worst case scenario, it's actually going to cause you to misunderstand some things and end up learning wrong. So anyway, so R, flap D, LZ, like turtles. Okay. Um, well, it's not just Spanish speakers. It's a lot of speakers. These are some difficult sounds, right? The TH sound, the R sound, the flap D sound. And I can go ahead and I can guarantee you that the single biggest reason why those are difficult for you has nothing to do with the sounds themselves. Okay. The sounds themselves can be relatively difficult, yes. Um, but at this point, especially with what I've learned about mouth posture, I very firmly believe there's no such thing as an objectively difficult sound. Okay. Now, the R's across languages are sounds that even some native speakers don't fully develop for whatever reason. Most do, right? Like 99% do, but like in English, sometimes a speaker will just always keep the W sound. They'll never develop the R. I've heard in Spanish, sometimes there's some speakers that never learn how to roll the R. So it is a little difficult, but um, if you are trying to produce these sounds with the wrong posture, you're making it nearly impossible for yourself. It's like if I wanted to, this is a stupid example, but I'm really good with stupid examples. Let's say there's something really heavy, right? It weighs like, I don't know, 30 pounds, and I need to lift it with one arm. Okay. If I try to lift it like this, it's going to be easier. Where if I try to lift it like this, right, with my hand like this, right, out to the side, it's going to be a lot harder. Now, though, I just have to lift it. There's no saying how I have to lift it. I have to lift it. If I try to lift it this way, sure, I could probably do it, but it's going to be a lot harder to do. Or I could just do this. Um, so, and these sounds are perfect examples. There's a reason why these sounds are difficult for many speakers because you don't have the right posture. And I like to use Spanish as an example because I never knew about posture until the beginning of this year. I discovered it for myself, and then I found out that actually it's a thing that other people are talking about, but I discovered it on my own first as a concept. And then I verified that it was true, and I was like, oh yeah, okay, other people are talking about this. Recently, I actually found out that everything I've been talking about with mouth posture has actually been scientifically verified, which I didn't even know. So I'm definitely on the right track. Um, but when I was trying to learn the Spanish R sound to like not just a single tap, right? It's very similar to a flap D, but actually like trilling it. As I've said before, it took me 6 months of daily practice. 6 months. Most people would have given up. It took me 6 months of daily practice, trying to get feedback from my Spanish partner that I was seeing, multiple times a week. And just like trying different things, I'd put like a pencil in my mouth and try to like wrap my tongue around. And there's all these little techniques that generally don't work. um, that people talk about. So I tried so many things, and after about 6 months, I finally was able to just get it like da 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 da, like really weak, too much air, doesn't sound natural, but multiple taps, I got it to start working. Now, once I learned about mouth posture and I started experimenting with Spanish mouth posture, which I'm still doing, but even just having the base, come on, Okay, looks like I disappeared for a second. Hopefully you guys can still see and hear me. Let me know if not. Um, looks like there's a little connection issue for some reason. But anyway, so anyway, the American English mouth posture is much more open and farther back. So trying to tap up here is really, really difficult. There's too much space. It's very, very difficult. I have lots of practice doing that, so I can do it relatively easily now, but it doesn't sound right. Now, if I go more into a Spanish posture, which I'm developing more through singing. It's hard for me to do in speech because I haven't practiced it as much. And I still have difficulty pushing my tongue forward and getting this held higher. But let's see. Arroz. No. When I'm singing, like I'll be in the process of singing. I can't really do it on command yet. When I'm in the process of singing, a lot of the time it just effortlessly happens. I don't even have to try to trill my R. It just happens by itself because I have the right posture, or at least most of the right posture. um, so if you're not in the right place, let's take the TH sound in English. In Spanish, your tongue is pushed forward. The back of the tongue is pushed forward. It feels relaxed to you. You don't notice it's pushed forward, but compared to English, it is pushed forward. Okay. So the TH sound is, if this is your top teeth here, TH sound, the front of the tongue has to be, it doesn't have to go between the teeth like everybody teaches you for some stupid reason. Like that's how we might over enunciate, or it might just happen to come out that way. It's okay. But usually we don't put it between the teeth. Okay. You don't have to do that to make the TH sound. You just have to be really close to these front teeth, behind them, anywhere behind the top teeth here. We'll just put it here, like right here. Okay. No problem. Now, obviously, there's a little bit of shape to it. You have to get, you don't want to block the airflow. And so there's little details to it. But if your tongue is pushed forward and your jaw is more closed, like the Spanish jaw is generally held a little bit more closed than the English jaw, and you're tight up here, okay, you're already farther forward. And so in order to make the TH sound, when you try to make it, number one, other things are going to be in the way. Like you don't have enough space here. But even if that's not a problem, or putting that aside, like it's really hard to get the right position for the TH because your general vocal tract is just too far forward. It's not going to work very well because you're not in the right place. For us, because we're more open and farther back, when I do the TH, I have to extend the front of my tongue forward to reach the teeth. You probably don't have to extend forward, right? You're probably already kind of right around that area. Um, so, and then there's certain combinations, right? Like you're talking about here. Kst, kst, kst. Okay. So we have the kst, that's, whatever. S and TH. St, st, st. Again, if you can't get into the TH position, especially if you don't have the right posture, if your S is up here, right? Because our S is not all the way up here, guys. If you have a more forward posture, your S is probably like right here, like under your, like under the gum line or sort of in line with the teeth. I can't say for sure. I haven't pinned down all those details. But I do know I have at least one Russian speaker I'm working with. She said that when she does the S, her tongue is like way up here. Our S is like back here. It's around the bump, the alveolar ridge bump. We have a lot of sounds here. T, d, n, s, z. The sh and zh, sh and zh are a little bit back here. So we don't hang out here a lot. Even our e isn't as far forward. It's kind of pulled back a little bit. Okay. So if you're trying to go S to TH and your tongue is all the way up here and your jaw is more closed and you're tighter up here and you try to do like, like I have good control. I'm trying to kind of do it a little bit wrong, but still like produce the sounds. And it's already like, it's harder to do just by having the wrong posture. And I'm a native speaker. So that's the key. The mouth posture is the key. Once you have the mouth posture in place, things will become a lot easier, and then you can work on the specific details you need for whatever sounds and whatever combinations. So I don't want to spend like all day on this point, but mouth posture first. Mouth posture first. Yeah. When practicing impromptu speaking, we don't have to worry about our sounds, right? Do we develop a better sound while doing shadowing? Good question. So yeah, pronunciation is generally improved outside of conversation. Okay. Because when you're speaking, I mean, there's your grammar, right? There's your pronunciation. There's noticing how the other person is interacting. Like your brain is using so many resources through your eyes, through your ears. You get to a point where, if you're kind of comfortable speaking, say you're like lower intermediate to upper intermediate, where you'll say things and you don't even realize exactly what you said. And I've had this happen so many times where like my partner will correct me and be like, did I say that? I don't remember saying it exactly like that. And I was like, huh, I didn't even notice I made a mistake there, because I'm so focused on what I'm trying to communicate, and seeing, that person, how that person is reacting, all basic communication stuff, body language, blah, 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 that your brain literally can't process it all. That's why the grammar, the more that you practice grammar, the more you practice pronunciation, it starts to become internalized, and you can focus on actually communicating, and your brain has resources to deal with, all the stuff, just like in your native language. But the you're already dealing with the grammar and just communicating yourself on top of the pronunciation. So you can maybe notice certain things that you do in pronunciation. Maybe say if you're trying to work on the R sound, you pay extra attention anytime there's an R. You try to, make sure it sounds good or whatever. But you don't really have a lot of time to do that in a conversation. So most of the improvements for pronunciation will come outside of conversation. I do not recommend trying to improve your pronunciation during conversation. Okay. That's why shadowing is so powerful, because it allows you to mimic and fine tune the details based on what you hear, that you can then make into muscle memory, so that when you do go speak, that muscle memory will eventually start to kick in, and you won't go into, the way you used to do the sounds. That's a sort of a simplistic general overview explanation, but yeah, don't worry about your pronunciation too much while speaking, because it's not going to matter that much. Thank you so much for your answers. You're welcome. You got this. You got this. Thank you. Responding to Joe, try to say this combination slowly. That does help. Yeah, slowing it down can help, and later speed them up. Exactly. Yeah. One of the best techniques for learning any skill, especially pronunciation, and this is actually part of the mouth posture course too. I don't always do it, but if a particular sound needs a lot of work, I try to remember to include it. Slow is fast and fast is slow. So if you're trying to rush through things, you're actually slowing yourself down, and it's going to take longer for you to get that. Where if you go really slow, both in terms of like, it doesn't mean that you have to spend forever on like one particular sound or one particular detail, but if you physically go slow, like if you can say you're trying to produce the sound, right? So if you go, especially if you build the center of gravity, and you try to transition into it, you say like, don't just say like, like maybe it might sound kind of good, but there's all kinds of little things and you don't know what's wrong. Where if you go, you have time and resources to feel what you're doing, to hear what you're doing, and to try to notice, okay, is it going off the track? Is there a point where I start saying like, that's not the right sound. I don't want that one. That's not going the right way. So I don't even have to get all the way into the sound. I already know that something's wrong, and I have to figure out what that is. Okay. So yeah, go slow to go fast. You're going to improve so much more faster if you do things slowly. Kyoto in your area. Hi, welcome. So happy to be on your live today. Yeah, glad to have you. I was watching a video the other day on the internet. Okay, we have one more thing here. I'll pick up that thread here in a second. A lot of teachers say we should think in English and stop translating. Do you agree? What means think in English? So what does think in English mean? I know we have a weird word order. So I actually, somebody asked about this last week. Do you have to think in English and stop translating? No. If you speak enough English consistently over a long enough period of time, your translation time will become so small that it almost disappears. And I know that from personal experience, because I was teaching myself Spanish. I had no idea what I was doing. And that's kind of how my Spanish more or less developed, because I was doing so many things wrong. But Ideally, right? Like when you speak in your native language, you don't obviously you don't translate anything because it's already in your native language. But the thing is that you also don't necessarily think in your native language, right? When you're speaking, like if you're thinking, like you're actually thinking, you're not speaking, you're thinking, obviously your thoughts are probably gonna be in your native language. But when you're speaking, the time between image, idea, feeling that you want to express, and the formation of words, that time is usually so small unless you have to sit there and maybe there's a certain way you want to phrase something. Okay, maybe you might have some thoughts going on, before they come out. Um, but when you're speaking your native language, it's just like if you're thirsty, you don't have. I mean, maybe that thought will occur to you and then you say it to somebody, but let's say a good example. Let's say you accidentally touch a hot surface, right? You're not going to think like, how do I say ow? No, it's just going to happen. However you say ow in your native language, you might even throw out a curse word or say, ah, that's hot, right? You don't. There's no thinking involved. It just comes out. It's one thing, right? It's part of your being. You don't have to do that in a foreign language, but ideally, you would want to get to that point. Right? That would be true mastery of the language. I don't care how bilingual you are. You don't have true fundamental mastery of the language unless it becomes part of your being and it comes out just as effortlessly as your native language. Now, there's nothing wrong if it doesn't do that. I'm just saying, I would define true absolute mastery of a language as that state. So if that's your goal, then yeah, I mean, you should shoot for that. And again, I haven't talked too much about grammar on this channel, but a lot of my techniques for grammar are designed to help you build that, to help build the subconscious web of connections that a native speaker has between, say, like prepositions, articles, all these different things. So you actually feel it and you don't have to think about it. It just kind of comes out. And it does still take some practice, of course, but it's sort of hacking into the personality of the language instead of filtering everything through your native language and trying to make it come out in English. Okay, so again, you don't have to do that. There's nothing wrong if you don't do that, but it depends on your goals. If you don't care that it takes you an extra second to translate in your head, that's fine. Who cares? But most people don't want to be stuck there. They want to be able to speak without, having to translate it first. So, okay, so Kyoto says there was Nicki Minaj on the VMIS with the award. She turns to Miley Cyrus and says, back to the beat that had a lot to say about me the other day on the press. I want to know another way to say this formally. Okay. Don't mind my grammar mistakes. Sometimes I think fast, then I tap on the keyboard. Yeah. THEN, then. Oh, unless you're saying I think faster than, that would be correct. So two slightly different sentences. They both work in this case, but yeah. Anyway. Yeah, so that's fine. But how do you say that formally? I mean, I wouldn't, as I've said before, American English, I mean, we do have ways to express things formally, but American culture, even in what might be considered formal settings like a work environment, school environment, um, we generally tend towards more informality than you might expect in your native language. And that doesn't mean we're just like straight up informal all the time with everybody. But I think it's better to think of American English more instead of formal versus informal. It's much more like standard politeness versus informal. And most of the things you say are going to be within standard politeness. Like no matter who you're talking to, it doesn't matter if you're talking to your boss, if you're talking to a friend. Um, we generally do that standard politeness. And then in informal situations, we might, play with things, mix things up, whatever. So that standard politeness is all you need for a formal situation. I don't care. I used to say if you're talking to the Queen of England, but I guess we can't do that anymore. The King of England, I think it's a king now. I don't pay attention. I'm pretty sure it was a prince that became a king. But anyway, I don't care if you're talking to the King, Queen of England or Spain or whoever, the Emperor of Japan. you Americans aren't are probably not going to be speaking super, super formally, right? In fact, when we think to speak informally on purpose, we tend to add a bit of a British accent to it. I might have been a little bit of Irish in there too, but um, it's almost like a joke, right? Now I'm exaggerating a bit. It's a general blanket statement, but there's you don't want to focus on being too formal. Anyway, that aside, how would you say this in a cleaner way, a more polite way, I guess? I mean, just replace be with person, and you're fine. Everything else is normal language. Like, yeah, just don't use the B word. I don't know. I don't know what else to say about that. When you say TRDR, STR, so yeah, okay. The back of the tongue is raised, right? Immediately when you say TD things. Okay, so Russian name or some other language that uses the Cyrillic alphabet that I cannot read. Welcome. um, right, immediately when you say TD. Okay. To- I don't know if I would say specifically the back of the tongue, but uh, yeah, you don't have to form the T and the D before you start forming the You can already have that at least partially formed, have that sort of pressure and that shape there as you're in that TD position. And so it's like the tip is doing something, and then the rest of the tongue is doing something. Um, and that's probably what we're gonna do, because then when we release that, it's just gonna already be there, right? Um, so yeah, you can be in position. That's actually a common. Uh, I don't think it's talked about too much, but in terms of like the physical formation of linking, obviously, I mean, you're just going from sound to sound or whatever, but there's some combinations where, say, one sound is on one part of the tongue, another sound is on the other part of the tongue, and we'll actually have both of them fully or partially formed at the same time. And then when we release the first one, the second one's already there. Obviously, you can't do that with all combinations, but with the T and the D, it's a close. So it's not like there's an S sound coming out that would be interfered with by the R. If I say like or see, I can't even do that. It's really hard to do. I try to do an S and R at the same time. But if I go from an S to an R, so I have to actually pull into the R. I can't have it formed before I do it. But I can do that with the T, because the T is just closed, and then when it opens, the R is already there. So this does not feel right. This is not feel right. Absolutely not. In no way. Are you talking about the pronunciation? Would have to be the pronunciation, because this is Finn we're talking about. This does not feel right. This does not feel right. This does not feel right. If we're being really lazy and speaking really quickly, I suppose I really want to resist this, but I suppose it could be possible to kind of just like skip over the D. I would not recommend that at all, like in any way, shape, or form, even if you're speaking really quickly. I do not recommend that, but it does seem like something that might happen. Yes. Um, player. Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Does that sound off when you're going slower? Yeah. So when we're talking about a and an sound, um, usually there's going to be a small y between them. Now, normally the word here is play, right, which is just a diphthong. Then we add an to it. It is possible to blend them and say like player, player instead of player, player, air. That combination does exist as a possibility. You never have to make it. You can always keep a small y, which is sort of the easy little trick that I give you guys in the our colored vowels lesson. But or part 2, I think, was the diphthongs for that. Does it sound off when you're going slower? How many players is it? Maybe it can, yeah, because remember, since this combination is not required, okay? Same thing with ire, by the way. But it's something that can happen. It's not necessarily a super fast thing. If you're speaking normally, it's no problem. Whichever one comes out is fine. But if you're enunciating, remember the purpose of enunciating, the purpose of speaking more slowly is to make things clearer. And so this is one of the cases where if you're trying to be clearer, we're going to go back to the way that it should be said, which would be player. That doesn't always happen, but many cases that's what will happen. Anytime that something could like blend, I mean, regular diphthongs aside, like, you know, oi is oi, like a is a. I'm not going to say like play or something like that. But this is sort of like an extra special thing that doesn't have to exist. And so slowing it down would make it sound a bit weird if you keep it that way. Yeah. 20. So nasalize the e, drop the n and the t. 20. There are 20 people here. 20, 21, 22. Yeah, especially if we're adding numbers after, like 21, 22, 23. That's probably the most common way. For 20 itself, we're probably going to, we still might nasalize the e, but it's more likely because it's that number itself. It's probably a little more likely that we're actually going to keep the n and the t and say like 20 or 20. We can also often drop the t because the nt plus y or nt plus y, nt plus vowel rule. So 20, 20, that's fine. So lots of combinations here. But especially like 21, 22, 23, 21, 22, 23. You can, instead of you can do as well because it usually reduces to so 21, 22, 23, 24, 25 allows us to speak a lot more quickly instead of saying 21, 22, 23, 24, which we might also do if we're counting more slowly. You know, so okay, 21, 22, 23. But if I say 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, I'm not going to take the time to push out the n and the t. There's no need for it. Very good question. Yeah. I love how you explained about slowing down. Well, thank you. Would you recommend to practice shadowing 25% slower while shadowing? I sound mumbling though. Okay. I sound like I'm mumbling, or you can use mumbling, like mumble as sort of an adjective, mumbly with a Y at the end. I sound mumbly. Anyway, would you recommend to practice shadowing 25% slower? So we kind of touched on this, I think, the other day. I think I responded to that comment. How you mentioned something about like in Rachel's English Academy, they have you do like 50% speed or something like that. Trying to think of a simple answer that doesn't involve a whole lot of explanation. So there's more than one way to shadow. And as I've described before, I think that it's good to do multiple passes where like you're focused on the intonation, you're focused on, or like the intonation, the rhythm, the stress, those sort of higher level details, where you don't care about the sounds, right? Because you're just focused on getting those down. That's good to just focus on that by itself at one point, right? And then you have like, okay, make sure the sounds and the linking are good or whatever. And then you try to put it all together. Now, slowing down when it comes to shadowing, there's a potential issue two potential issues when it comes to slowing down for shadowing. Number one is when you slow it down, you're no longer practicing at the speed that natives speak, which is kind of the whole purpose of shadowing, is to be able to produce the language naturally at normal speed. Number two, when you artificially slow things down in like an audio editing program or something like that, if you do it a little bit, it will generally stay pretty smooth. But if you go too far, it starts to become a little choppy. And that apparently has to do with like the limits of audio manipulation and stuff, especially if you're keeping the pitch the same. I'm not an expert on all that, but so it'll start saying, instead of like, I want to go to the beach, it'll start saying like, I want to go to the beach or something like that, right? And then that's just not good to practice with. So up to a certain point where it's not choppy, that can be useful, but do not do it all the time. It's one tool. Okay. It's one tool. What I recommend you do is like maybe when you first start shadowing it, especially for the sounds themselves, not necessarily like the stress and the rhythm, but especially the sounds. Maybe slow it down a little bit so that you have a little more time to process, you have a little more time to hear, okay? And you can maybe, have a little more time to try to match what it's doing, and that's okay. Or if, say, you're shadowing something and there's like a particular sound in the flow of that or a particular combination that you're having extra trouble with, take that piece, which this is really easy to do in Audacity. You could just highlight a section, it's free software. But highlight a piece, slow that piece down a little bit, and then practice that slowly. But to do, say, 25% speed shadowing all the time as your main focus, I don't think that that's the best thing to do. So use it as a tool if needed. You never have to do that, but it can be very useful. But only as a tool. Okay, it shouldn't even be like half of what you do. It should be maybe like a quarter at the most of what you do. So there's something else I was going to say about that. Where going slow really comes most in handy is the lowest fundamental level, the lowest fundamental levels, I'll say, which in terms of pronunciation in a language would be the individual sounds, the formation of individual sounds, as well as the linking of those sounds into syllables, even if that's just a simple syllable like in, you have I and n, right? Two sounds put together, whatever it is. And when you're trying to master those sounds, especially if you're working on the posture, making sure that you're holding the posture while you're making these sounds and going between them, that level is where slowing down, at least at first, becomes super, 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 super powerful. Especially because, as I said earlier, it gives you more time to notice the little mistakes you're making and to make little micro adjustments to try to fix it. Okay. Then you're going to, compared to if you didn't do that, you're going to learn a lot faster by doing that process. And then you don't want to stay there. You don't want to say like, okay, yeah, I fixed it. You want to say, okay, can I say it faster? And it doesn't have to be super fast, but it'd be like a little faster, a little faster, a little faster. So say you're like, okay, okay, my A is good. My N is good. And oh, my transition's off there. Something went wrong. Okay, let me fix that. Okay, that sounds good. I'm not going to go through all possible little mistakes and stuff. Just give you guys an example here. So the transition was good. Okay, I can do that at that speed. The I sounds good. The transition sounds good. The N sounds good. Okay. So now let me see if I can do it a little faster. In, and then maybe I go in. Oh, that didn't sound a little off there. Now, as you speed up, it's going to be harder to notice the mistakes, but once you start building that pathway and you're listening very closely, you'll start to kind of feel or hear, oh, that was a little bit off. Let me do that again, try to do that speed again, but get it correct. Okay. And you just repeat these processes over and over and over and over and over. It's all about micro adjustments, slowing down, speeding up, making sure that you're holding the posture, right? All that stuff. But it's literally just like repeating. It's very scientific, as I said before. You try it. If it doesn't work, you make a little change. If it doesn't work, you make a little change. If it doesn't work, you make a little change until you find it. It might take you 100 times before you find it. Don't give up. But once you find it, say the I sound. Once you find it, okay, now you have to sort of make that into muscle memory because it's probably not going to be consistent. So you practice, make sure you pay attention, make sure, you go slowly, make sure it's in place, make sure you feel everything is good. Okay. Once that starts to become very solid and you can say pretty easily, just kind of going into it. All right. That's solid. Right. So as you're going through your shadowing, you might find certain sounds that you're like, every time I try to say the sound, it's off. So what you need to do, you need to drill down to that fundamental sound level, spend some time with the formation of that sound. Don't gloss over it. Okay. And again, the mouth posture course is designed to kind of build everything step by step into one whole process. So that's all going to be one big thing. But if you're doing it yourself or you're not particularly paying too much attention to, all the mouth posture details because you want to do it your own way, you got to go in and pay attention to, that level whenever you notice a consistent problem like that. Now it's the King Charles III. Oh, okay. Yeah, whoever. I don't know. I'm American, so, yay, England. I don't know. Nothing against England, but I don't really care too much about who the king or queen is. Do you know the color vowel chart? Do you think it is a good way to learn the perfect good pronunciation of American vowels? Color vowel charts? You mean like L-colored vowels? Because I mean, there's a vowel chart which just has like regular vowels on it. I actually have. I'll probably link it here for you guys. Downloads on my website. And I can actually share my screen. I keep forgetting I can do that. Let me share my screen. How do I do that again? There's a button somewhere, maybe. Oh, okay. I need this. Why are you not working? I'm so confused. Isn't this supposed to move things? Why is it not moving things? I'm so confused. Shift 5. No. I don't know if it's because I had that connection issue or if I'm forgetting to push something, or is there a screen share button? Present. Oh, share screen. Okay. And then I want to click on this one. Yay. Okay. And hopefully that actually, yeah, okay. Sorry, my screen is a little wide. I have a wide monitor. Anyway, back to this. So this is the downloads page of my website. And these are the vowel charts. So this is English Hex official vowel chart. Now, I do want to make some slight adjustments to this. But what I did, so this one here, so you can see it better. Oh, okay. I went to the standard General American vowel chart, and I made little changes to it based on certain details and certain hacks. So this is mostly the same that you're going to find for a General American chart. But for example, this one, the ah, it's the cot merger ah. The general standard chart, you'll see this symbol over here, and then you'll see that backward C symbol like somewhere up here. I don't teach you guys that way. You don't have to do that to sound natural and neutral. You can just learn the cot merger. It's one sound, makes your life easier. So that's a little change I made, right? I added the half L because it does function very much like a vowel, the ul sound, the dark L, right? I threw the O on here because you can do the O as a monophthong or very monophthong-like. It doesn't have to go from like here up into the sound or anything like that. And then there's like the upside down V and the schwa, which is the range for one sound, kind of like through this area. So it's going to look a little different than what you might find elsewhere, which is why it's called the English X official vowel chart. But yeah, vowel charts are super, super useful. We have the diphthong chart. So there's just A, I, ow, oi. Those are all the diphthongs we have. I don't care about this like ew nonsense or like saying that E is actually a diphthong. Like throw all that garbage out. I don't care if it's technically accurate. Even if it is technically accurate, it doesn't matter. It's not going to help you. This is the combined vowel chart. It looks a little messy, but that's this first chart and the second chart combined. Again, I don't care about the IPA. I just have those on there as reference for people who do know the IPA. I actually don't recommend the IPA. It causes problems. But if you like it, go ahead and use it. That's why there's numbers on this, because that's the order that I teach them in, and it's a lot easier. You don't actually need a symbol. You just need to remember the number and what the sound is. And if you learn it that way, you never need the symbols. Like you can actually learn them by sound. And then you can actually focus on your ears, not your eyes. But anyway, this is the R-colored vowel chart for the basic vowels. So ear and ear is a range. You could be E or I or anywhere in between and blend into the It sounds great. It doesn't matter. You could do either one. I think the standard way it's taught is ear, but if you say ear, that's not a problem. Air, okay. So it's like in bed, blended with exists in some dialects of American English, but most speakers don't use that anymore. It's more of a British thing. So you don't have to use that. You can just use air. Anything that would be air. I'm pretty sure everything turned into air. There might be something that shifted around somewhere else, but it should always be air. Then there's the merged blended into R. So you don't have to worry about like R or something like that, like up here, or whatever it is. It's just R. It makes your life easier. There's the R colored O, which if you don't have the cot merger, it's going to be that backwards C is like or. You don't have to do that. You can say or. Okay. There's no R colored like in like hurry. You don't have to do that. You can just do just regular Make your life easier. You're going to sound great. You're going to sound fine. Neutral, natural. Obviously, the isn't going to blend with itself. It doesn't matter what the symbol is. Don't even care about that. The oo could become R colored. You can say or, like tour or whatever, but it's never required. The only time that it is required is if I think like boor and boer, where like not coloring it actually makes a different word, but there's very few cases like that. And then the you might see this in dictionary sometimes as like R colored, like there's an R after it. You never have to do that. You could just do So you see this English hex approach, it makes things easier, it makes things simpler. You still sound natural, neutral, perfectly fine. The A, as we were talking about earlier, like in player, it can potentially become R colored. You never have to do it. You can just use So anything that would be air, you can use air. I plus ire. You can add a small y between and say ire, like fire. It's not a full y, it's fire. Or you can say fire, and you can blend them. This is taught standard as a triphthong. You never have to make it that way. If you want, you can, but you can make your life easy and just always add a small y between the I and the Same thing with ow. Yeah, a small y between our, or you can blend them and say our, or our. Either way is fine. And then oir. This actually says this is a small w between, not a small y for hour. For like oir, I don't think is really a combination. Like as a blended thing, we say oir, like with a small y, just like the air. So these are the charts that I have for you guys to make your life a lot easier while still sounding very natural, neutral, and native. Back to this. Okay. So yes, vowel charts are good, but vowel charts only go so far. A vowel chart shows you what part of the mouth the sound is in. So it's like front of the tongue, middle of the tongue, back of the tongue, and then approximately how high or low it is. But there's a lot of details that it doesn't show. Like it doesn't show the shape of the tongue. It doesn't show where any tenseness that's going on. Obviously, the primary tension is going to be where the sound is. It doesn't show you the mouth posture. Many English teaching sources are also very misleading. This includes Rachel's English, as far as I know, because, like, for example, teachers say, okay, for the ah sound, you have to ah. For the e sound, you have to e, right? No. That's if you're fully enunciating or you're emphasizing, yeah, sure, we tend to do that. But e, ah, not e, ah. That's fine. E, ah. My jaw barely has to move. E, ah. In fact, I can go My jaw is like moving a millimeter. Okay. This is real speech, and this is built into the mouth posture course too. So yeah, the vowel chart might make you believe that, oh, okay, yeah, ah's way down here, so I have to open my jaw nice wide. Ah. For the clear, perfect sound, sure, but that's not actually the sound itself. Anyway, moving on. They're a very good tool, very good reference, good start, but they're just one tool. Is there an accented American group of people who pronounce the short just like the short e? There are no long and short vowels. Who are they? Where do they live? So pronounce like eh. There's variation like that. In fact, sometimes you'll hear me, not all the time, but influence from my grandma. She's from New York, but she has a general neutral sound. But when she says bag, it doesn't sound exactly like beg, but it sounds much more similar to beg than bag. So she'll say like, do you need a bag? Beg. It's almost kind of like kind of like a. Need a beg. So it's this weird little thing, and sometimes I'll pronounce it that way too. I've noticed if I have an a before a k or a g. So if you notice me do that, That's why. It's not like I do that every time. But where do they live? Who are they? I don't know. There are people around. I wouldn't care about that. If you do that, you're going to have a bit of an accent. It's going to sound regional. If you don't care and you want to do it that way, that's fine. But it's not standard, and I would ignore it. You know Japanese, right? Well, ちょっと少しわかりますよ. Could you please tell us some differences you notice between English and Japanese in terms of mouth posture? Thank you. That is actually something that I do not know much about. I have not worked with any Japanese speakers on mouth posture yet. Even a little while before I came upon the idea of mouth posture, I could already tell that there was something different, because I notice when I say like, which my stress pattern is probably off. I know you have a pitch accent, which I am nowhere near close to mastering, because when you take Japanese classes, they don't even mention pitch accent. And if they do, it's like one sentence, like it's not taught for some stupid reason. Which, by the way, like, I know you're Japanese. I know the common perception that Japanese speakers have is like Japanese is like the hardest language in the world, or one of the hardest languages in the world. It's not. It's just very, very different. You know, Japanese speakers learning English, you guys have a lot of difficulty. Why? Because it's very different. Like, it's always relative. You know, like somebody who speaks Korean learning Japanese, it's going to be relatively easy because a lot of the grammar is similar. There are a lot of similar words. Obviously, they're two different languages, but there's a lot of, you know, shared things, especially compared to English, where there's almost no shared things. But that aside, I'm not trying to say Japanese is easy for us, because it's definitely not. Spanish is a lot easier, relatively speaking. But when I say like kudasai, number one, I kind of want to flap that D, and if I don't flap it, it's like kudasai, and it's like just the formation of the sounds, just how like the quality of the sounds are coming out of my mouth, regardless of the pitch accent. It just doesn't, like, it sounds heavy. It sounds like it's very clearly accented. And for the longest time, I've been trying to figure out how you pronounce that D sound in that word. And then it kind of hit me that probably has to do with mouth posture. Because there's the exact way that I'm forming the sound, but then there's also the posture itself that's probably affecting it. What I can tell you, I don't think I have this open anymore. I think I closed it. If I don't know if you can find it online, like for free. I know it's on his Patreon. You might be able to find it somewhere on YouTube. Somebody might maybe reposted it when they weren't supposed to. But if you look up Dogen articulatory setting, I think he used articulatory setting as the term, because that's the linguistic term for it. But Dogen talks a bit about it. He has a specific video where he talks about it. And he said, which I don't know if I guess I can't agree or disagree with this because I don't have enough experience, but it just seems weird to me. He said that, which this isn't just him. Like, he speaks really good Japanese, like really, really good Japanese. Like, he pretty much sounds Japanese, but he's also going off of a research paper. He himself said that he's not too experienced with this exact concept. So he brought in some like scientific research that he found to support what he was talking about. But he said that apparently the Japanese jaw, some researchers say that the Japanese jaw is more open than American English. Some say it's more close. There's actually disagreement there for some reason. To me, it makes no sense that it would be more open. That doesn't make any sense, because American English seems to be more open than almost every language, because we need a lot of space. But so I'm going to say the jaw is probably a bit more closed in general. Again, the jaw doesn't have to move too much, but it's going to generally be set a little more open or a little more closed, depending on the language and the dialect. Like British English tends to hold the jaw a little more closed than American English. That doesn't mean we can't open into or things like that. It's just, it tends to stay around a general height. So the Japanese jaw would be a bit more closed. He also said that because, and I've noticed this too, that like Japanese, now that I've tuned my ear toward nasality more, you guys are super nasal, like super, super nasal. Not to the point where it sounds like say somebody from Vietnam speaking English, where like they're very clearly up here, but enough to where like now when I'm listening to Japanese, like if I'm watching anime or something, and I tune my ear to the nasality, I can hear it, and it might vary from speaker to speaker. Maybe certain dialects have a little more, a little less, but I can hear it. And in fact, I think you guys don't even usually close into like and n, because you just like let the nasal take over. um, that aside, apparently there's more nasality. The top of the throat is held a little bit higher, gives you a little bit of a higher sound. Um, the back of the tongue, according to Dogen and what he found, is apparently lower than American English, which is very strange to me. Because everybody else, even the languages that I found that are about as open as American English, the tongue is still higher. So if Japanese is lower than American English with the back of the tongue, that would be the first one that I found that does that. And if I try to do that, it's just is really weird, because this is supposed to be higher, but then this is lower. It's kind of like, I don't know. So if you find that video, I mean, he talks about some of those details. There are very clearly differences. But I'm definitely not an expert on that. I don't know when I'm going to get really back into language learning. Obviously, I want to master several languages. But when I do, eventually I'm going to go back to Japanese. My Japanese, I understand more Japanese than I speak. And even that is like, I would say upper beginner. My speaking ability is probably lower beginner. I could say some things, I can understand some things, but I'm not even conversational. Which I should be, because I started studying Japanese when I was 13 by myself. But again, I had no idea what I was doing for the longest time. So when I go back to Japanese, I'm going to be like figuring out the details of the posture, nailing that down. I'm gonna as I learn. Again, this is all in the future. It's not coming up anytime soon. But like, let's say I get back into language learning, I learn Japanese. Okay, what I learn about the mouth posture on this channel, I'm going to be making like, say, a special lesson of American English mouth posture for Japanese speakers that will directly address how to shift it, and then like American English mouth posture for Spanish speakers and Russian speakers and whatever. So that'll be coming for those of you who speak the languages that I want to speak. But if you don't speak one of those languages, then you kind of just have to go off of the general lessons, which are definitely sufficient. But I want to optimize it for you guys who speak the same languages that I want to learn. I have a question. Is an American accent possible without a chest voice resonating? Yeah, okay. As a child, I tried to learn how to say the R sound a year and never learned. Yeah, okay. So this speaking from the chest voice, no. No, 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 1,000 times no. I've done a little bit of experimenting with this. What I have noticed, like, I very, very strongly recommend that you don't try to speak from the chest. Okay. Because I don't speak from my chest. I'm a native speaker. I sound perfectly fine. At least I think so. um, Nobody that I know says that I have a particular accent. So if I try to speak from the chest, because if you're speaking from the chest, you're probably gonna feel most of your vibrations from the chest. I don't feel most of I feel vibrations here, yeah, but I don't feel most of them. If you feel no vibrations here, you probably have a problem. But if I try to speak more from the chest, it's gonna sound more like this. It's maybe a little fuller, a little deeper, a little bit louder. It's kind of awkward, a little uncomfortable for me to try to do this. And my working theory of why some teachers say to do this is because it helps you shift the top of the throat in a way that gets you into a better position for American English, but it's accidental because you're trying to shift everything down here, and this may or may not happen to shift along with it. But that's a byproduct by accident. Like, you don't want to get things on accident, right? What I have noticed with a couple students, especially particularly Russian students, so Russian uses hardly any breath when speaking. American English uses quite a bit of breath when speaking. And I know many languages don't use as much breath as American English, so this is applicable to many people. The way that we pull in the breath and the way that we let it out does come from here. Okay. So if you'll notice, right, I take a breath. So I'm speaking, I have all this air here in my chest and I can let it out. But I'm not letting it all out at once. Now I kind of feel like I need to take a breath. Okay. And there's thought chunks and how to divide up thought chunks and stuff. That's a different topic. But that's tied into this of like when we might take breaths. But I'm sort of pushing the breath out from here, from my chest. Okay. I'm not pushing the breath out from here in my throat. See, that immediately makes me sound less clear. I get this sort of vocal fry going on because everything's sort of trapped here and it's not coming out from here. But if I speak more normally, I'm not pushing out super strong, like trying to do it really hard. You don't want to sound breathy, but you need to get the diaphragm working and actually breathe from here, like breathe out from here. And that's going to help everything flow out better. Okay. So that does seem to have an effect on the breath, but I very strongly recommend that you don't try to speak from that point. Okay. In fact, it seems to me I need to do a little more research to verify this and before I make like an official statement. So this is, not my final say on this, but it does seem to me based on my research and experience that the primary resonance in American English is the back of the mouth, maybe a little bit into the middle of the mouth, depending on what we're doing. And I haven't talked a whole lot about resonance yet. I'm going to have a couple things to say on that on the next update lesson. But it doesn't make any sense to me if the primary resonance is from here. Why would teachers tell you to try to speak from your chest? You're going to resonate here. It's just like there's something that I'm not understanding, or there's just something that's not right there. Could be either one. Maybe I'm just not understanding something, but yeah, don't try to speak from the chest. When I changed the place of voice, I learned how to pronounce an R in an hour, listening to speakers with high voice placement, and they do not sound like Americans. Okay, so yeah, as I said, things can happen accidentally. You might have gotten better breath going, because even if I do if I try to like not breathe normally, like I'm forming the R correctly. The top of my throat's in place, the R is in place. It doesn't quite sound like an er. So I maybe get a little bit more okay. So the breath is very, very important for the sound. The breath is part of the sounds. Again, trying to bring it down here, you probably opened some things up. You probably shifted some things with the tongue. It's not like you can't hold everything here the same you do as your native language and then just speak from here and then magically everything is better. Like that's not how it works. So I can guarantee you that even if maybe trying to speak down from here, it fixed it. This is not the one magical thing that you changed. There's probably other things that change. Maybe you're aware of them. Maybe you're not. It's very likely that you're not. Phase 0 is designed to help you become more aware and feel what's going on so that when you do move down here, you're actually like, oh, I noticed this moved and I noticed that moved. And, instead of just thinking like, oh, if I try to speak from here, magically I sound better. It's because you're changing some other things. So this is not the cause of that. Anyway, trust process. To me, these charts never worked. I only started understanding these charts after a long time. Yeah, bell charts aren't required. You don't have to use them. They're very useful tools. The thing that bell charts are most useful for is when you're just starting. Same thing with the IPA. Like if there's any good use for the IPA, like just one good use for the IPA that I will concede, and I do think this is actually a good use, is when you're starting a new language. Or if maybe you've been learning that language and then you realize how important pronunciation is and you're finally starting to look at the pronunciation. But when you start a new language and you're trying to figure out what are the new sounds that I don't have in my language and approximately where are those sounds placed. Okay, so knowing the IPA, you don't even have to know the IPA symbols themselves. You just have to see like, okay, I looked up the IPA for my language. I looked up the IPA for this language. I see that, okay, we share these symbols, which just because the symbols are shared doesn't mean they're the same. That's one of the problems with the IPA. But they're close enough where they're going to sound, the quality might be a little bit off, but they're going to sound pretty similar, right? They're going to be close enough to be fine. So you say, okay, well, I see this symbol in my language. I see this symbol in this language. So probably don't have to worry too much about that. Oh, I see this new symbol that I don't see for the symbols of my language. So you don't even have to memorize what the symbols are. You just have to know, okay, this is a new sound. This is a new sound. This is a new sound. Find some words that use that sound. Practice making that sound. Go to the vowel chart. Say, okay, well, this sound is here on the vowel chart. So I know it's going to be around here. And then especially if you look at a vowel chart for your native language, you say, oh, okay, so this symbol is placed here in my language. It's placed here in this language. And this new symbol is placed here. Say like E, and I, which you don't have in your language. You know about where it is. And you have an idea of kind of like what part of the mouth you should use, an idea of kind of maybe how it should be formed. Because, E is up here. So if I is also in the front, it's probably going to be still in this part of the tongue. And then from there, you can do your micro adjustments and tweaking to actually get the sound itself. So there's very, very good vowel charts and IPA, very good for initial analysis and figuring out where things are. But past that, they're really not that useful. Last week, what? Oh, sorry. You mentioned on the street and in the street last week. That bugged me real good. You mean in the street? On the street, yeah. I think it was just a typo. Last week, yeah, okay. Oh, I see. Yeah, there's not supposed to be a question mark there. Anyway, we can talk a little bit about that. Again, so I was trying to draw a good example for the prepositions. Without knowing the full context of on and the full context of in, it can get a little confusing because it's sort of like, when I explain why we say in a car but on a bus, it's a similar type of thing because you might say like, oh, we're also in the bus, but it's like, well, in the bus sounds like in the engine, right? On the bus, the reason we say on the bus is because it's a platform. The purpose of a bus is it's a big platform that has seats on it, designed to transport many people or things. That's the purpose of the bus. So we say on because you're on that platform. The platform happens to have walls and a roof, but it's a platform designed to transport many things. A car is a little box that is for personal use that you get in. You're now surrounded by the car. You're in the vehicle. So it depends on the purpose, right? When I was talking about on the street and in the street, so let's say, right, so usually there's two lanes for a street, right? There's one going this way, one going this way. So there's lines in the middle, right, to divide the two lanes. Now I can say the lines are painted on the street. That's a good use of on for street because we're talking about the surface of the street. They're painted on top of that surface. But if you are standing and you are on that surface, the street, we don't say that you're on the street. We say you're in the street. Okay. And what I was trying to, the reference I was trying to use is we say like you're on a mountain or on a hill and then you're in a valley, right? So there's that sort of relationship. When we talk about sidewalk, you can be on a sidewalk, then there's the curb that goes down into the street. There's into the street. Okay. So you're on the sidewalk, you're in the street. In addition to that, a street is like a corridor or a hallway, right, a passageway for cars. Now this is where it gets a little muddy because we say I'm on a path. If you say you're in a path, it means you're blocking the path, right? You're in the way of the path. But if you're on a path, you're walking on the path. So it depends on exactly the exact context. This is one reason why the prepositions are tricky because the context can determine exactly which preposition we use, but under the surface, they're still working the same. Okay. That's the point where the logic of prepositions don't completely solve everything by itself, because sometimes the exact context, the exact thing that we're describing, might actually shift which preposition ends up getting used. But anyway, when the cars drive in the street, okay, it's a passageway, right? It's like you have the lines in the middle, and then you have the side of the street. The car shouldn't go on the sidewalk. They shouldn't go into the other lane. So it's almost like right. We actually call it a lane. You're in a lane, right? Okay, you're in a lane, just like you're in a hallway. Hallway happens to have walls, a lane does not. But there's sort of this imaginary barrier where the car is not supposed to go into the opposite lane for cars going this way. The car is not supposed to go onto the sidewalk. Okay, it's supposed to stay in the lane. So it's in the street in its particular lane, right? Now, if I wanted to describe physically where is the car placed, okay, so there's a little bit of a different context. Like I just want to know where in space is the car, right? Is it on the house? Which probably wouldn't happen, but maybe you're playing a video game or something. You can move objects around. Is it on the house? Is it on the sidewalk? Is it on the street? You could still say in the street in that case, because that's what we usually do. But now you're looking at what is the surface that it is physically placed on top of. Now on the street becomes available again. Context. Okay. Context is, you have the logic of the preposition and then you have the context. And these two things combine to create the exact preposition that you're going to use. Now, the logic takes care of most of that. That's the under the network surface that will express itself above the surface in different ways. But depending on some specific context and exactly what you're saying, that might make what you expect to be this preposition actually be this preposition. Hopefully that makes more sense now. But anyway, moving on. Okay, I see you corrected that in the street. Yeah. I've got a Japanese name. I noticed that. And I am not from Japan. I do not speak Japanese. Yeah. I am Brazilian. By the way, we spell Brazil and Brazilian with a Z sound, an S, or with a letter Z. Sorry, we pronounce it with a Z sound. Brazilian. And I have got Portuguese as my mother tongue. I started learning English 4 years ago, and now I have got accented Portuguese because of English. Yeah. So I've noticed that happen with a couple people. There's one person I'm working with who's from Mexico, and like when I had him, like I wanted to hear him speak Spanish, and I was like, "Are you sure you're a Spanish speaker?" And he says even like his friends and family, they say he sounds like an American because he's too open. He's like, he kind of lost the posture for Spanish. Now, most cases, you're not going to lose your native posture, like it's built in. But there are some strange cases with some people where things can kind of happen. And I'm not sure why that happens, but it's possible. Anyway, now your question is, was the style of writing I just used completely formal? Absolutely not. Especially using have got, that's much more of an informal structure. Now, because you're not contracting I and M, which even if the situation is formal, we would still do. Okay, I want to make that very clear. Contractions have nothing to do with formality, like at all. Maybe a little bit if you're trying to sound super uber, like impractically fancy formal, like, and then which will also almost without exception add a British accent too, like I am the king and you are the peasant, then we might uncontract. Is very natural there, but we will tend to uncontract for emphasis. 90% of the time, I am is going to be I'm, no matter the formality. Okay. But by uncontracting that, you do make it sound a little more formal, but in an unnatural way. Like, and I am not from Japan. I am Brazilian. It's like, why are you saying I am? It's like you're emphasizing. Like, to me, it sounds like you're saying it very strongly. Like, I've got a Japanese name and I am not from Japan. Okay, now I can still emphasize the not, but if we uncontract the M, it still adds emphasis. But you say, I am not from Japan. I do not speak Japanese. I am Brazilian. See, it kind of sounds like you're like, that's how I would kind of maybe try to read it. if I notice it, because my brain actually contracted it or tried to contract it. Because it feels uncomfortable to read I am, I am, I am. It actually feels physically uncomfortable for me, like because my brain expects I'm. Anyway, saying, so again, I have got that, again, sounds more informal, but then when you say Portuguese as my mother tongue, that can maybe sound a little more formal in a way. I wouldn't say it's formal, but it sounds a little more structured, a little more polite, kind of. If I wanted to say this, like, I don't even know how I would say it in a formal way. Like, that's what I'm telling you guys. Like, it's standard politeness versus informal. Like, if I try to change this into a formal register, I wouldn't even know how to do it with this particular little paragraph, because it's like it's there's not really much to do. Now, if I wanted to make it completely informal and consistent, I'd be like, which have got is a little bit strange here at the beginning. We'll probably just say, I got a Japanese name, and I'm not from Japan. I don't speak Japanese. I'm Brazilian, and if you say have, it can sound standard. If you just say got, it can sound more informal. Have got also feels a little strange here to me as well. But and I got I mean, you could just say like my mother tongue is Portuguese. That's also pretty standard, not necessarily informal, but it doesn't sound as like saying Portuguese as my mother tongue sounds slightly fancier than Portuguese is my mother tongue, or my mother tongue is Portuguese. So yeah, there's little tweaks that you can do here and there. I started learning English 4 years ago, and now we'll probably say I have a whether it's formal or not, informal, we'll probably say I have. I don't really recommend that you guys use I have got, unless you are more informally saying have to, which automatically cancels out if it's a noun. So if you say like, I have got to start working out, that's very, very common and normal. If you say like, I have got a car, to me, that it kind of hurts a little in a way. It feels uncomfortable. So if there's to in a verb after it, perfectly fine, but sounds informal. Same if you say I got a car. Okay, that you don't need a verb after it. You say I got a car. That could mean past tense, or that could mean you're making a statement saying have, because got can actually be used in the present tense. It's a weird one. That's a whole other topic. But using have got without a verb after it, I strongly recommend that you don't do that. It just doesn't sound right, to me at least. In the street, oops, yeah, okay, we fixed that. Side note, when you say could assign Japanese, the D doesn't touch the upper gum ridge, the tongue can rest at the bottom. Coulda. See, I don't even know how that would be physically possible. Japanese doesn't have air when speaking, and the people close their throats, and it goes up. It is pretty much opposite of English. Yeah, it would seem so. The work that I'm doing, trying to adjust into Spanish posture, I think is probably going to help me a lot with Japanese, because there's going to be some shared things. Like the throat is held higher. But yeah, part of what makes Japanese sound Japanese is the way that you guys hold the vocal tract. And I would not be surprised if you guys have like a special way that, like, maybe it's not limited to Japanese, but maybe it's like rarer or something. But we'll find out. Luis, welcome. Based on your experience, what would be your recommendation to learn English to have a good pronunciation? Well, to learn English in general, that's a big question. To have good pronunciation, mouth posture, 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 mouth posture. I'm currently developing the course. Sorry, it's in progress. But mouth posture. If you don't have the right mouth posture, it is impossible or nearly impossible to sound like a native. Now, if your goal is not to sound like a native, you just want to sound clearer, the mouth posture will still help you. But it's much less required if you just want to sound clear. So it depends on your goals. But if you want to sound as close to native as possible, which I very strongly believe that the average person, which probably includes you because average means average, the average person can develop a native or near native accent in any language they want. I don't care if it's English to Japanese or Japanese to Arabic or Russian to Spanish. Well, that's actually not not too big of a difference there. Russian to German, we'll say. 100% possible for the average person. That aside, that would be pronunciation specifically. Now, that also does apply to English in general, because if we're talking about the spoken language, obviously there's a written language and the spoken language. Okay. These are two different things. One is visual, one is auditory. Now you can mix them and you can overlap them. Obviously they go together, in some way, but these are two completely different input output pairs. One uses your eyes to read, and then that's the input. What's the output? Oh, the output is your hand to write the characters or type the characters, right? It's a completely different input output pair than your ears and your mouth. And that may not seem important, but it is. Okay, people don't realize that. It's very, very important. It's a significant distinction, because once you start realizing that, oh, if I'm trying to improve my pronunciation and I'm spending a lot of time reading, you're not improving your pronunciation. I mean, that's an obvious, simple example. Now that doesn't mean you can't read. I mean, you can listen and read in the process of working on your pronunciation. I'm not saying never read for your pronunciation, but actually reading can hurt your pronunciation. It's a minor thing. It's not going to be a permanent problem. But if your pronunciation is off, especially if you have a thick accent and you're reading, what are you doing? Most people subvocalize, which means that you're going to hear your own voice producing that accent in your head, and you're just reinforcing that sound to your ears, even though you're not physically hearing it. And then that can negatively impact your progress in English. Again, it's not a big point. I don't want to make a big deal about that, but it can have something of a negative effect. There's multiple ways to learn a language. I have a whole book on it. It depends on your goals. It depends on your preferences. There's an input primary path, an output primary path. There's a pronunciation first path, which I personally recommend and endorse. But if you're talking about improving your spoken English, I very strongly recommend that you start with the fundamental level, which is pronunciation, specifically ear training, if nothing else. So you can hear the difference between E and I and A, et cetera, et cetera. That will directly translate into your listening skills. Also some ear training on like stress patterns, being able to hear the stress, being able to hear the rhythm, because it looks just based off your name, I would assume that you are a Spanish speaker. Maybe possibly Portuguese, but probably Spanish. In which case Spanish is stress timed. So all the syllables are roughly the same length, and then you stress some of them, so you go louder. English works completely differently. And if you don't have the ear for that, it's going to negatively impact both your speaking and your listening. So if you can hear it and start actually hearing how the stress works in English and then be able to reproduce that, it's going to help, right? So pronunciation is the core of the spoken language, period. You don't have to do it, but it's undoubtedly going to help everything above it, the listening, the speaking. Also, it's going to indirectly help your reading, your writing, your grammar, your vocabulary, especially the vocabulary. But anyway, pronunciation. Aside from that, check out my book. I mean, I'm not big on like, hey, you only have the answer if you buy my book. But I don't have a lot of content on the stuff in the book except what's in the book. So I could just direct you to the book. That's what I got right now. And that'll give you lots of different techniques and ideas, and you can build your own path to fluency and stuff like that. But again, it also very much depends on your goals. See, people say like, what's the best way to learn English? And then they think, well, okay, I need grammar, I need words. And then you spend a lot of time learning grammar and words, which is not the best use of your time to begin with. But that aside, people never tie it to their goals. They just say, I'm going to learn English or I'm going to learn Spanish. And then they just start trying to learn things, which is better than nothing, right? But what is your goal? Like, are you going, let's say you live in Mexico, are you going to go to the United States in 3 months? Okay, well, that's probably going to have a direct impact on how you study and what you study, right? Now, if you say, oh, it's more of a hobby, I just kind of want to be able to like understand TV shows and read some books, that's going to directly impact how you study and what you study, right? Now, you can have an overall goal of like, I want to be generally fluent and literate, just like a native speaker. And again, there's multiple ways to do that. So based on your preferences, you can say, well, I want to do this first, maybe focus on the listening first and not so much the speaking so that you can understand. That's what Steve Kaufman does. He can understand what he hears when he's in a conversation. He doesn't have to use his brain resources for that. And he can focus on actually the speaking. Where somebody like Benny Lewis, he'll take the little input that he gets, immediately output it and try to use it a lot, and constantly make these little improvements as he goes. And you can become conversationally fluent like that in a very short amount of time, like say 1 to 3 months, depending on your intensity. It's perfectly possible. People think that's not possible. It is possible. It depends on if you do the right things and what your goals are. The downside to that is, as Benny himself has said, like when he was learning French, he focused so much on the output. Obviously, there's some input always, but he focused so much on the output that when he was conversational, he had gaps in his listening and gaps in his vocabulary because he was so focused on communicating what he wanted to communicate and not on being exposed to the language as a whole. And so in order to get to the advanced level, he spent a lot more time reading and listening, right? Where Steve Kaufman, as I said, he focuses a lot on the reading and listening. He has this very broad base of understanding. He can understand everything he hears in a conversation. Now he starts speaking, but you don't just magically have the ability to speak. You have to actually practice the speaking and practice it a lot. Okay. So there's always a trade-off. And if you do sort of a mixed approach, that's also fine too. There's, as I said, there's many, many ways to do it, but those are the two sort of big pillars where you have the clear trade-off between the two. And then you can always fill in the weak spot later. It's not like you have to be perfect the whole way. So yeah. Your Japanese sounded fantastic. Well, thank you. I disagree. I strongly disagree. What can I say in Japanese? Some things. Otearai wa doko desu ka? Yeah. No. uh, that's something they teach us in the textbook for some reason. Like first semester Japanese. Otearai wa doko desu ka? I suppose it would be useful as actually in Japan, but it's like I don't need to know that. Yeah, my Japanese is even rustier than my Spanish because I really don't use that. But anyway, did it sound like a British writer because the use of I have got that I could reduce to I've got or even I got, or I could change to I have? Yeah, that might be a bit more of a British thing. Because to me, it just doesn't sound right unless there's a verb after it. If you say I've got a car, I have got a car, I've got a car, I've got to go, I've got a car, I've got a car. Yeah, if you contract I and have, it magically sounds better. If you say I got, then that's fine also. Yeah. If you say I have, yeah. So it depends on exactly what you're saying, but with this have and got combination thing, I'm pretty sure you can always just say have. Have would be like the standard thing where got is the informal thing. And then I've got is sort of like in between. It sounds kind of informal, but it's not quite informal, not quite standard. Sort of feels like it's in the middle. But I would definitely say it doesn't sound like normal standard politeness, which is have. It's going to be perceived as a little bit more informal. Yeah, good point. My parents are taking me to a phonologist against my will because they say my Portuguese is too sloppy due to me using English a lot more in my daily life, which to me is total BS because to me I sound just fine in Portuguese. I don't know. What the heck is a phonologist? That just sounds like a job with a fancy label that shouldn't exist. Somebody's trying to be something that doesn't exist. I guess, is that like a speech pathologist kind of? I don't know. I mean, I can't say for sure. I don't speak Portuguese. I haven't heard you speak English or Portuguese. I don't know how you sound. If the people around you are saying, hey, your Portuguese is kind of sounding a little sloppy or a little weird, I mean, they would know better than me. But maybe they think that you're not speaking properly enough in Portuguese, I guess. I don't know, which shouldn't matter because I'm sure you could do that if you wanted to. Like, it does seem strange to me, yeah. But I don't really have much to say about that. So good luck. Buy a book how to learn a language on Kindle. I'm looking forward to reading Jane's exercise. Perfect. I appreciate it, and hopefully the book is helpful. If you have any questions as you go through it, then you can always ask in comments or the lives. But I tried to lay it out in a certain way. And the first part of the book talks about like the path building, especially like the two main paths. So that's definitely designed to be first. And I recommend that like you start with that and kind of because I mean, if you're just looking for like techniques that you can use, then that's fine. But if you're trying to like, how could I learn better? How could I like build a structure for myself that matches your goals and preferences? Definitely spend some time in that first part of the book after the introduction. And you can start to kind of figure out like, okay, based on my goals and based on my preferences, I think I want to try doing this. And then when you look at some of the exercises, some of them are going to maybe be better suited to this or that. And many of them you can use in either one, but it depends. So it's really kind of like a build your own adventure book, right? It's literally build your path to fluency. So yeah, I'm late today. Well, that's okay. You're here on time because I haven't left yet. It's uncomfortable to me to, so don't use it. This is an example of how English teachers teach in my country. And I pictured it with a British accent. Yeah. Well, good job picturing it that way because, I mean, at least in my opinion, maybe there's some Americans that would disagree with me, but it just seems weird. Anyway, how do you pronounce had in I wish you had told me when had isn't contracted? Okay, well, there's a range there. You can fully enunciate and you say, I wish you had told me. You had, so everything's pronounced there. Just H, A, and D. Or so you will just keep you as you and not reduce it to yeah. Keep things simple. It doesn't matter either way, the same thing would apply. But if we say you, okay, so we're going from the oo sound, and then we can do, let's see. Is there another thing we can do? Yeah. Technically, you can get sort of like a little bit of the H in there. That might happen sometimes, but we won't worry about that. We'll throw that to the side. That's another weird little thing that can happen. But what will commonly happen, because H is just breath, right? It's the voiceless vowel. It just generally takes the shape of the vowel after it. So if I say had, right, it's like a voiceless ah that I then add the voice to. Had. But if there's a sound before the H, so if it's not the first word, right? If I say like he told me, it's probably gonna be an H there. But if there's anything before it, whether it's voiced or voiceless, the most common thing that happens to the H is it just disappears. It just sort of gets linked through and canceled out. That doesn't have to happen. We use H's all the time. Like I say, that doesn't have to. Notice I was emphasizing there. So it's a little more likely why we might keep the H. It doesn't have to happen. But what very, very commonly happens, probably more often than anything else, is it'll be canceled out. So you can say you add. And we know if we're going from an oo into any other vowel, we can link with a small w. Okay, so it's not a full W because oo does not end in W. That'd be woo, right? So it's not you wad. That'd be too much. It's just you end in that oo. And it's sort of like, it's like a weak or a lazy W. you. He was opening right? So I wish you had told me. I wish you had told me. Now the in had can also be reduced to especially in really fast speech. I wish you had. Wish you had told me. It's probably that combination there, dropping the H, linking with a small W, changing the A into it's probably going to be one of the single most common, if not the most common way to pronounce these two words together. You had. Again, if you're going more slowly, you're enunciating more, probably not going to say you're going to say Don't necessarily have to bring the H in, but it's more likely. Again, it's a range. You're slowing down, you're enunciating more. We're probably going to bring that H back in. But if you're just speaking normally, drop the H, link with the small W, turn A into Is there anything else we could do? I wish you had told me. We should. If you're speaking really quickly, you can maybe reduce the A to I. We should, or even We should have told me. Yeah, those could also work. So or and I can't think of any other variations. So, anyway, and I was going to talk about the form of got, which is the nightmare of English teachers. Yeah, I'm gonna solve that. I already have it like probably 3/4 solved. I just haven't made any content about it. I know I probably should, because everybody's gonna be like, "Oh my god, this is amazing." It's kind of in the back of my mind. It's probably a topic I'm going to touch on in the, I don't want to say near future, but sooner rather than later. You're the best. Well, thank you. Hello, how do you pronounce Ima? Just like that, Ima. Now there's no there's no apostrophe, right? Because I know it's I'm, but if you write Ima, which we only write informally, we only say informally, there's no reason to keep the apostrophe anymore. It's just IMMA. In fact, we usually don't even capitalize the I. That's how far we go. It's just IMMA. But it's I, and then and then a schwa, Ima. That's it. So it sounds exactly like if you said like I am a teacher. You contract I am, you reduce a to a. I'm a teacher. It sounds exactly the same, except there's a verb after it. I'm a do it tomorrow. You know that it's I am going to drastically reduced. I want to remove this screen. There we go. So yes, thank you for the question. I don't want to say your name because I'm going to say it horribly. Jehi. Sorry if that's horrible, but thank you for the question. Thank you for joining us today. But yeah, remember, it's only informal, both in speech and writing. This is the most extreme contraction / reduction in the whole language, as far as I'm aware. And it is only informal. Dear Josh, these questions are about the first ones. You talk like so much that you forget the context of the question. What? Okay, I guess. And lots of love from Brazil. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I was gonna say you're welcome, but I was like, that's not the right response. Wendell is here. Hello, Wendell. Thank you for joining us. I know you probably have questions as always. I want to set a goal. My goal is I want to communicate with people more deeply. Okay. But I can't word better what resonates in my heart. Do you come up with any suggestion or affirmation sentence? No, not really. I mean, you can keep you focused, keep you on track, I guess, especially showing up every day. Because that's usually the hardest part. Like learning a language or a particular skill isn't necessarily like, I mean, it's not easy, but it's not necessarily as hard as most people think. It's really like the showing up and putting in the work consistently. Like that's hard for anything, you know? So I want to, this statement is perfectly fine. Something that maybe might help you out a bit better here. Multiple ways you can say it. You maybe say something like, I want, because if you're trying to like something that resonates in your heart, I don't know what resonates in your heart, but I assume it's going to be maybe a little bit of a fancier way to express this. That could be a little more specific to what you're trying to say. I want to communicate with people on a more fundamental level. So that implies going deep, like, getting to who the person is. Or I want to get to know people on a fundamental level, or on a fundamentally, you can even say fundamentally deep. It's kind of oxymoron, but in a deep way, right? You can say, I want to get to know people in a deep in a profound way. Might be a little more in line with what you're trying to say there, but yeah. Sometimes it's just hard to express exactly what we want to express, even in our native language. It must be a hard job, so many people to answer. Yeah, I know. You're telling me. One research question. All right. I don't know if you can answer it. Maybe. I'm not a researcher, so we'll find out. What is? We need a verb there. Come on. No. What is your opinion about grammar and word explanations to get native-like pragmatic competence? Yeah, I can definitely tell you've been reading research papers. Well, I touch on that from time to time. I was talking about that a bit earlier. You don't want to approach learning grammar and words in a superficial way, like just memorizing a list of rules, because that knowledge is fine. Some of it's useful, but knowledge is not skill, right? So just knowing the word, like you can even know the word, like maybe you can read it, but if your listening skills aren't developed, if you haven't heard the word enough times, you may not even hear it in conversation, even though you know the word and you can read it, right? It goes back again to like the written language or spoken language using two different input output systems. That's one reason why it's a significant thing, and not just some, like splitting hairs. But there's multiple ways to go about it. But what I'm trying to build, say with like logical prepositions, I want to do the same thing with verbs. I was supposed to write that book earlier this year. That didn't happen. But articles, verbs, prepositions, the WH words, like diving deeper into the subconscious connections that native speakers have, learning to directly feel how these words are used within the language, rather than, because if you look at translations, like say if I go English to Spanish, in in and on are both generally translated as in. It depends on the exact context and how that would be, said in Spanish, but a lot of times it's just en, right? Now going from Spanish to English, they have a big problem with that, because now they have two options, maybe more, depending again on the exact context, but often it's going to be between in or on. And it's a common mistake, not just for Spanish speakers, but for many speakers, but especially Spanish speakers, where they'll say, instead of I want to sit on the beach, they'll say I want to sit in the beach. And that means two completely different things. Which is fine. You're going to make mistakes. There's nothing wrong with the mistakes themselves. It's a process. But if you approach it more with a mindset of critical thinking, and not just like, okay, this, because the grammar and like a word list is just a description, right? Especially if you're learning translations, that's a horrible way to learn. Like just one-to-one plain translations. There's a role for translations. I'm not saying translations are all bad, but you don't want to just learn the description. You want to think like, okay, why is this used in this case? Or based on this context, why is there a difference between this and this? Or sometimes, the grammar might be different, say like between the present perfect and the simple past. And the difference in meaning is so small that it doesn't matter. You could use either one, at least in American English, and we'll tend to use the simple past in those cases. And so then you say, well, why is that possible? And you say, well, okay, if I think about what this sentence means and what this sentence means, one's present perfect, one's simple past, can you feel that the difference in meaning is so small? It doesn't matter what the grammar says is technically accurate, right? because that's not how people speak. People don't care what's technically accurate. People speak, and then every few hundred years or so, grammar gets updated based on how people are speaking, um, because that's how language works. Where most teachers, especially because it's easier, they get caught in teaching, well, this is the grammar, this is how you should speak. And for any particular grammar point, a lot of it is going to be fine, but for any particular grammar point, it may not actually match, like putting prepositions at the end. I can't believe that's still in grammar reference material. Like that should have been deleted probably 50 years ago. You can put prepositions at the end. It's a perfectly normal part of the language. It has nothing to do with formality. And to say anything otherwise is, I want to be family friendly. We'll say BS, complete BS, nonsense. So anyway, you want to try to feel it, think critically. Don't just memorize a bunch of rules. So I know it's kind of a general blanket explanation or statement, but that would be my general thought on that. Hopefully that answers your question. And that is also pragmatic. It may not seem like it on the surface because it almost seems like, especially if you go into the logic of prepositions and you go through the book, you're like, this seems like a waste of time. But I can tell you from direct experience working with students with the logic of prepositions, you start to spontaneously create phrasal verbs that you never even heard before, you've never seen before. So it works. There's the process works, and it's very pragmatic. It's just very different than anything that I've seen anywhere else. How can explicit knowledge of words and grammar be useful for native like competence? Can explanations complete language acquisition? Okay, so that kind of goes back to a little thing I said. Some of the knowledge can be useful. It's perfectly fine. Explicit knowledge. Think of it this way, right? So we always, in general, we want to keep an eye on the 80-20 principle, the Pareto principle, right? 80-20 rule. And that takes different forms and different things, but it generally applies to like everything in the universe. Where here, right, it would be, if we're talking about like, say, words, right, we know that, say, the 2,000 most common words in speech cover 80% of the language. So there are some people when they're learning a language, this isn't for everybody. I tried it myself and it was very difficult to do. I did learn quite a few words in the process, but there's some people who say, okay, I'm going to focus on those 2,000 most common words. I'm going to learn them. And then I'm going to be in a good place to understand and speak. And it works. That's one thing that you can do. That approach isn't for everybody. And then there's maybe the exact way that you go about learning those words. That's a different topic, right? There's what you learn and then how you learn, and there's different techniques that you can use as well. But when it comes to grammar, right? So there's probably about 20% of the grammar for the whole language that if you learn that 20%, it's going to give you 80% of the language that is generally used, probably both in speaking and writing. So things like tenses, right? Especially the present tense, but tenses are a huge thing, right? How you talk about present, past, future, like how are verbs used in this language for this tense? That's a really, really big thing. Okay. And it depends on the language, but especially in a language like English, where with some verbs aside, things are generally pretty consistent. Like in Spanish, you have like yo como, so to eat, right? Yo como, tú comes, él, ella, usted come, nosotros comemos, ellos or ustedes comen. Or if you're from Spain, vosotros coméis, right? That's 5 to 6 different ways to conjugate to eat just in the present tense. That's not even including the subjunctive or anything like that, just regular, normal present tense. In English, I eat, you eat, he eats. Oh, we add an S to it, right? She eats, it eats. We eat, they eat. Just one U, right? There's no you formal, you informal. There's no, whatever. It's so, yeah, there's some differences. Obviously, eat in the past is irregular. We don't say eated, but it's I ate, you ate, he ate, we ate, they ate. It's just ate in all cases. So it's still easier that way, right? It's relatively simple. So it depends on the language of exactly, how difficult that's going to be. But if you can start getting those patterns and you can start realizing how to use verbs in the tenses, even in just a basic way. Like English speaking children, when they're learning, they're starting to speak more and more, they don't say I went, they say I goed, because they pick up that ed ending before they pick up the irregular ending. And then at some point, I think around the age of like 5 or 6, I don't remember exactly, but at some point, they start using went. Okay. So you don't have to be perfect, right? You can say, if you know the ed ending is like, oh, okay, most verbs in English end with this ed in the past. Okay. So let's say you're a beginner English learner and you start saying, oh, yeah, so um, all the words, of course, many of the most common verbs are irregular. That's part of the problem. So all of the examples I'm trying to think of are actually irregular endings. But um, if you say like, I goed to the store and buyed some milk, um, whatever, it's like, okay, it's going to be wrong, but it's going to be understandable, right? And you're still applying those general rules that will work for most verbs, but then you learn from experience, oh, okay, it's not I goed, it's I went. And then you learn from experience, okay, I have to remember it's I went, he went, we went, they went. Okay, it's always went, right? And then you just work that in. Do not try to get everything right from the first words you speak, because it's not possible. Okay, you have to let go of some of those things. So anyway, bit of a tangent there. Knowing some of the explicit knowledge can help. You want to focus on the things that are going to give you the most benefit. All the little details, like every little, exception to the article rules. There's literally 7 pages of rules. Like that's not useful in really any way. Even if you did memorize it, it's not going to translate to your speech very well. It's just going to slow you down because you're afraid of making mistakes. It's a horrible way to learn. Okay. Um, so the explicit knowledge should focus on, especially grammatically, vocabulary. There are many ways that you can approach vocabulary. It could be based on you personally. It could be based on things you're interested in. It could be based on common words. It could be a combination of those. Um, that varies, right? But and then even within that, you should probably focus on the most common within that category. So if you're learning how to talk about, I don't know, soccer, then you should probably learn the most common words related to that before you learn the uncommon words. But with the grammar, especially, like if you explicitly learn the biggest items, that's going to give you the most benefit. Okay. And you accept that you're going to make mistakes, focus on communicating. And then as you learn, as you make some of those mistakes, you start to figure out, oh, okay, so this is wrong. I need to change that to that. Oh my God. Looks like the Wi-Fi is dying again. Hopefully you guys still hear me and everything. But with my approach, hopefully the idea is you can sort of bypass some of that mistake process. You're still going to make mistakes. You still have to go through it, but it speeds it up and you actually start feeling it. Uh, is explicit knowledge required for language acquisition? Absolutely not. I don't think it's required. If you try to learn a language without ever trying to study any words or grammar, I think that's completely possible. 100% possible. But it's not the most efficient. It's not the most practical, especially as adults. If you're a child, sure, but we put children on a pedestal, saying like, oh, it's so easy for them. I mean, yeah, they have more brain connections. It's relatively, it's different, but it's not like some magical thing that you know they just like get overnight. Like it still takes years for them to absorb their native language. Like where adults, if you're doing the right things, which most classes don't teach the right things. They teach you very, very horribly. But if you're doing the right things and based on your particular goals and what you're trying to do, you can at least become conversationally competent in a language in say 3 months, 6 months. Like you don't have to spend 10 years trying to learn English. And all you guys out there who have been learning for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, if you're not at an advanced level yet, I apologize for the way things are taught. I mean, you'll probably agree with me that there's something wrong with the system. For those of you who are advanced and you've been learning for that long, well, you're already advanced, so you're just trying to improve further. But I always hate it when a student comes to me and they're in the intermediate level and they say, I've been learning English for 10 years. It's like, clearly there's something wrong. Something needs to change. Many things need to change, actually. So, yeah, some explicit knowledge and explanations are extremely useful, especially depending on how they're explained, but they're not ultimately required. Do I have in faster speech and, oh, okay, and I've sound different? Well, that's actually part of the reason why the contraction exists, because the contraction is ultimately just I have said really fast, so fast that the vowel disappears. And we can see that in the range of pronunciation. I can say I have, I have, I have, I have, I have, I have is sort of an now. The H is already gone. I've until the vowel just disappears. That's actually the range. Anytime you see a contraction, like a actual official contraction, I have, I am, you are, whatever, it exists because the fully enunciated version was, by enough people over a significant period of time said so quickly that the vowel disappeared. It was a reduction and it became an official contraction that we now write and speak, just like directly. That's all it is. So technically it is the fastest way to say I have. It's not something different. It's just the other end of the range. Because to me, a sentence like I have a car, come as I have, or I have, yeah, those are all possible. I have. Now, one thing you don't want to do in American English, if you use have as a main verb, there are a couple exceptions to this, but if you use have as a main verb, do not go all the way to the contraction. As long as you have a little bit of like a reduced vowel in there, or or whatever, it's going to sound fine. But as soon as you say I have a car, I have no money, that one maybe can work, but I have a car, I've some time. It's like it maybe there's some speakers where that sounds fine, but to me it sounds British. Like I don't speak that way. You might hear me say I have really, really quick to where there's a little reduced vowel in there and you maybe don't hear the vowel and it sounds like I've. But I can guarantee you that, again, with some weird little exceptions of sort of set phrases and stuff, we don't do that in American English for have as a main verb. I've just comes out as I've, yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, that was related to the other thing. So yeah, that's a bit of a special thing. But the reason why the contraction, like say like in the present perfect, right? It's ultimately because it's part of that range. But then if you have I have as a main verb, we don't go all the way to the end of the range in American English. Most of with those special cases aside. So it just doesn't apply there. That's horrible. I don't know what I was talking about, but okay. I love these lives. Good. It's 7 a.m. here. I should get going. Oh, sorry. That was 20 minutes ago. So bye. If you're still here, sorry for keeping you waiting. But yeah, no problem. You're welcome. And thanks for stopping by and hanging out. Based on the answers given to Wendell is that I started, we have an R in there, started caring too much about grammar and started caring about my accent vocabulary. Wait, what? Caring about my accent vocabulary. Because those are both positive. I don't know if there's supposed to be a not in one of those. I think we missed a word there. Looks like you. Okay, based on the answers given to Wendell, that I stopped caring. Oh, wait, hold on. I stopped. Yeah, okay. I stopped caring too much about grammar and started caring. Okay, that makes more sense. Started caring more about my accent and vocabulary. Yeah, it's probably generally good. Right, there's nothing wrong with grammar in itself. It's just teaching methods have improved. right? Before, right, way back in the day, there was the grammar translation method. That was the main way people learn languages and stuff, where it's like, okay, take this text and translate it into, into English, and then translate it back, and or whatever, is a bunch of translations. And there's a role for that can be useful, but that used to be like the way, right, that you would learn a foreign language. And then there was like the audiolingual method that developed, and then there's the communicative approach, which as far as I know, is still like the main model today, which also has its problems. Mainly because communication is very important. That should be the primary focus. Except the communicative approach, it says let's not worry too much about the grammar mistakes, which is good, right? Because that doesn't mean don't care at all about grammar mistakes, but you should focus on communicating primarily. But it also says let's not focus too much on pronunciation, and that's the big problem. If you had a communicative approach with a pronunciation basis, that which I don't know exactly how to blend those necessarily, but that would be a much better outcome, just overall, because the pronunciation base helps the communication. It's not in the way, it's not additional, it's the foundation of communication. So it's just the how do I want to say that? I want to say the institution, but the field seems to not acknowledge that, which is one of the biggest problems with language teaching today. Anyway, yeah, looks like I caught up, and it's about time for me to go anyway. So I think we'll probably end here. If anybody has any last minute questions or comments, I'll give a second here. But let's see here. Analytics. Yeah, I posted earlier that things are getting kind of tight here economically, and I might have less time to make videos. So I'm gonna try to keep up the pace, keep making videos and stuff, but I might have to get a third job. And I'm just really uncertain about the future right now. So we'll see what happens. That's one reason I want to start making other types of content, like about grammar and stuff, because it's going to open it to more of an audience. Maybe the channel, will actually start making a bit more money, and I don't have to worry so much about it. But we'll see. Anything else? So I'm late on what I had planned to do this week, but all that stuff is still coming. I'm still testing the master speaking technique, which is technically two techniques, but I'm going to make the lesson for the base technique soon. I'm still testing it on myself. Hopefully that should come within by the end of next week. I know I said that last week, but it's not ready yet. And then a present perfect continuous lesson. Of course, I'm going to do another analyzing your submissions. So those two will probably happen this week. And then I have the phase 2 mouth posture lesson, group 1, that I have to make. And that's a really big lesson. So, but as I said, I might have less time to work on stuff. So I want to do so many things. And at the same time, it's like I might have less time to do them. And it's really frustrating because I can't hire an editor to take some of that time for me. So I'm just like, I'm stuck in this like horrible position where it's like, I don't have the time to do what I want to do, but I don't have the money to pay somebody else to give me the time to do what I want to do. And I'm just trying to like build it up to the point where I can actually fix that problem. But then as the economy goes down, the revenue I get from YouTube is also going down. So I don't know, but we're going to work on it. We're going to keep going. So thank you guys, everybody, for stopping by. I don't see any other questions. Hopefully you can still see me and hear me. I'm not just talking to myself here. But I will see you guys next week, same time, 11:30 California time, 11:30 a.m. And look forward to this week's lessons. Hopefully I can get 2 or 3 out. So see you next time.